This contract was never supposed to be broken, but the moment he looked at her, the rules stopped making sense. The room is silent, the kind of silence that hums beneath expensive lighting and polished marble floors, where every breath feels measured and every decision costs millions, and at the center of it all stands Ethan Cole, tailored suit, expression unreadable, fingers gripping a single sheet of paper that was once worth more than any deal on the table, and then, without warning, he tears it in half. The sharp rip slicing through the air like a line that can never be redrawn, executives frozen, eyes wide, no one daring to speak as the pieces fall to the floor like something sacred just shattered, and his voice, calm but no longer cold, breaks through the shock. This contract is over, because she was never part of a deal, and just like that, everything unravels, because weeks earlier, that same piece of paper had been nothing more than a transaction, a lifeline wrapped in fine print, and Lily Carter had signed it with trembling hands in a quiet office that didn't belong to her world. The city stretching outside the glass walls, endless and indifferent, her reflection staring back at her in a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit, her fingers tightening around a pen she could barely afford to replace, and across from her sat Ethan, composed, distant, as if this moment carried no weight at all. 6 months, he had said, sliding the contract across the desk, you play my wife, we attend the events, we keep appearances. And when it's over, we walk away. His tone was precise. Controlled, the kind that left no room for questions, but Lily's voice still found a way through the pressure building in her chest. And that's it, she asked, her eyes scanning lines that felt heavier than they looked, terms that drew invisible walls between two lives that were never meant to cross. That's it, he confirmed, leaning back slightly, no emotions, no interference, no complications, a pause, just long enough to settle, and you don't fall for me. The words hung there, almost careless, like a rule he'd repeated too many times to believe it could ever be broken, and Lily swallowed, thinking about the overdue notices folded in her bag, the hospital bill she hadn't opened in days, the way life had quietly backed her into a corner where pride no longer had space to survive, and so she nodded, because sometimes survival doesn't look brave, sometimes it looks like signing your name on a line you wish didn't exist, the pen touching paper with a soft scratch that echoed louder than it should have, sealing something she didn't fully understand yet, and Ethan watched. Not with interest, not with emotion, just with the distant awareness of a man used to transactions, as if she were another agreement, another solution, another piece moved into place, and when she finally slid the contract back toward him, her fingers lingered for just a second too long, as if letting go meant stepping into a life she couldn't take back. He didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to, because in his world, deals were clean, controlled, predictable, and people didn't change the rules. But what neither of them knew in that moment, standing on opposite sides of polished glass and unspoken boundaries, was that this contract, this carefully constructed distance, would be the very thing that would break first, not because it was weak, but because something stronger was already beginning, quiet, uninvited, and impossible to ignore. The next morning did not feel like a new beginning, it felt like stepping into someone else's life without permission, and Lily Carter stood in the lobby of Ethan Cole's penthouse building clutching the single duffel bag that held everything she owned, the polished floors reflecting a version of her that looked smaller than she remembered, out of place beneath the towering glass and steel that seemed to stretch forever, and when the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, she hesitated just a fraction too long before stepping inside, her heart beat louder than the quiet music playing overhead, counting the floors as they climbed higher and higher, each number pulling her further away from the world she understood, until the doors finally slid open into a space that did not look real, a living room larger than her entire apartment, windows spanning wall to wall, sunlight pouring in over a skyline that looked like it belonged in a movie, and Ethan was already there, standing near the glass, jacket off, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal that even in stillness, he carried control like second nature. "You are late," he said without turning, his voice calm, not angry, just precise, like everything about him, and Lily glanced at the clock on the wall, realizing she was exactly 2 minutes behind schedule. "I am sorry," she replied quietly, stepping forward, unsure where to place her bag, unsure where she was allowed to exist in a place like this, and he turned then, his eyes briefly scanning her, not in judgment, but in assessment, as if he were recalibrating expectations. "From now on, you arrive 10 minutes early," he said, not unkindly, just certain, and she nodded, because in this arrangement, there was no room for argument, only adjustment, and he gestured toward the hallway. "Your room is the second door on the left, a pause, just long enough to carry meaning. The third door stays closed. Lily followed his gaze, noticing the door he did not want her to touch, the boundary drawn without explanation, and she nodded again, softer this time. Understood, because rules were easier than questions, and questions led to things she could not afford to feel, and as she stepped into her room, she realized it was larger than any space she had ever called her own, the bed untouched, the closet already filled with clothes she did not choose, everything prepared as if her presence had been anticipated long before she agreed to exist here. And she set her bag down slowly, almost carefully, like placing something fragile in a world that was not built for it. And when she returned to the living room, Ethan was holding a small velvet box, the kind that carried expectations far heavier than its size. "We have an event tonight," he said, opening it to reveal a ring that caught the light in a way that felt almost deliberate. "You wear this, and you do not take it off in public." Lily stepped closer, her fingers hesitating before accepting it, the metal cool against her skin, unfamiliar, symbolic. "It looks real," she said before she could stop herself, and Ethan's expression did not change, but something in his voice softened just slightly. "It needs to be," he replied, and then, almost as if reminding himself as much as her, he added, "Everything does," and for a moment, neither of them moved, the distance between them filled with unspoken terms that went far beyond what was written in ink. And as Lily slid the ring onto her finger, it felt heavier than it should have, not because of its value, but because of what it represented: a role, a boundary, a promise not to cross a line that neither of them fully understood yet. And somewhere beneath the quiet tension of that moment, something small shifted, not enough to notice, not enough to name, but enough to begin. The night air felt different at 30 floors above the city, thinner somehow, like even the oxygen here belonged to a world Lily had not earned. And as she stood in front of the full-length mirror in her room, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The dress fitted perfectly, the fabric smooth and expensive against her skin, her hair styled in soft waves that fell exactly where they were supposed to, every detail curated with precision. And yet her hands betrayed her, fingers lightly trembling as they hovered over the ring now resting on her finger, the diamond catching the light in a way that made it impossible to ignore, too perfect, too convincing. And for a moment she wondered if anyone would see through it, if anyone would look close enough to realize that none of this was real, that she was just a girl who had signed a contract because she had no other choice. And then a knock came at the door, sharp but not impatient. And when she opened it, Ethan stood there, already dressed, his dark suit tailored to perfection, his presence steady, controlled, as if he belonged to every inch of this world without question, his eyes briefly meeting hers before moving, taking in the details not with admiration, but with quiet approval. "We leave in 5 minutes, he said, and Lily nodded, stepping out beside him, the sound of her heels against the marble floor unfamiliar, each step a reminder that she was playing a role she had never rehearsed for. And as they entered the elevator together, the silence between them was not awkward, it was structured, defined by unspoken rules, until Ethan spoke again, his tone low, measured. "Stay close to me tonight," he said, adjusting his cufflinks as if the instruction were routine. "If anyone asks, we met through mutual connections, we kept it private, and we decided quickly." Lily glanced at him, processing the simplicity of a story that was supposed to replace an entire reality. "And if they ask why," she asked softly, and Ethan's reflection in the mirrored wall met hers for just a second, something unreadable flickering beneath the surface before it disappeared. "Because I chose you," he replied, the words direct, almost too direct, and Lily looked away first, her heartbeat picking up in a way that had nothing to do with the height of the building or the pressure of the night ahead. And when the elevator doors opened to the waiting car, the city lights stretched endlessly beyond them, flashing and alive, a stark contrast to the controlled stillness inside. And as the driver pulled away, Lily pressed her hands together in her lap, grounding herself, repeating the rules in her mind like something she could hold on to. No emotions, no interference, no complications. But the closer they got to the event, the harder it became to ignore the weight of the ring, the way it seemed to anchor her to something more than just a role. And when the car finally stopped, cameras were already waiting, flashes cutting through the night like sudden bursts of daylight, voices rising, names being called, and before she could fully prepare herself, Ethan stepped out first, turning slightly, his hand extending toward her, steady, certain, and for a fraction of a second, Lily hesitated, because this was the moment where everything became visible, where pretending had to look real. And then she placed her hand in his, the contact brief but unmistakable, and he helped her out of the car with a smoothness that felt practiced, his hand not immediately letting go, instead resting lightly at the small of her back as he guided her forward, and the cameras reacted instantly, flashes intensifying, voices overlapping. "Ethan, over here, is this your fiancé? When did this happen?" And Lily felt the pressure all at once, the attention, the scrutiny, the expectation, but beside her, Ethan did not falter, his posture unchanged, his presence unshaken, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried just enough to be heard, calm, controlled, undeniable. "Yes," he said, pulling her slightly closer without hesitation, "she is," and for the first time that night, the line between what was real and what was not began to blur in a way neither of them had planned. The ballroom felt like a stage where every movement mattered, every glance carried meaning, and Lily could feel it the second they stepped inside, the air warmer, heavier, filled with quiet conversations that stopped just long enough to notice her, to measure her, to decide where she belonged, and Ethan did not slow down, his hand still resting lightly against her back, guiding her forward with a confidence that left no room for hesitation, as if he had already decided that she belonged here. Even if she had not yet convinced herself, and the music drifted softly through the space, a string quartet somewhere in the corner, elegant and controlled, matching the rhythm of a world that never rushed, and as they moved deeper into the crowd, people began to approach, smiles polished, voices smooth. "Ethan, we did not expect to see you tonight," one man said, extending his hand, his eyes flicking briefly toward Lily with curiosity that was almost too careful, and Ethan returned the gesture. Effortlessly. "Change of plans," he replied, his tone even, before turning slightly toward her, just enough to shift the focus. "This is Lily," he said, no hesitation, no explanation beyond what was necessary, and Lily felt every pair of eyes settle on her at once, waiting, evaluating, and for a moment, the words she had practiced seemed to disappear, until she forced herself to smile, steady, composed. "It is nice to meet you," she said, her voice softer than theirs but clear, grounded in something real, and the man nodded, polite, but unconvinced, the kind of reaction she had expected, the kind that reminded her exactly where she came from, and as they moved on, the pattern repeated, introductions, polite exchanges, subtle glances that lingered just a second too long, until eventually it happened, the moment she had been quietly bracing for. A woman approached, elegant, confident, her presence sharp in a way that cut through the room. "Ethan," she said, her tone familiar, almost too familiar, and Lily felt the shift instantly, the way Ethan's posture changed. Just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her to feel it beside him. "Victoria," he acknowledged, and the woman's eyes moved to Lily, slow, deliberate, taking in every detail as if searching for something to question. "So this is the surprise everyone is talking about," Victoria said, a faint smile forming that did not quite reach her eyes. "You move quickly," and Lily held her ground, even as the tension built, even as every instinct told her she was being tested, and before Ethan could respond, Victoria continued, her voice smooth but edged. "Tell me, Lily, what is it that you do?" The question simple on the surface, but weighted with implication, and for a brief second, Lily felt the old hesitation rise, the instinct to shrink, to deflect, to avoid, but then she remembered the contract, the rules, the role she had agreed to play, and more importantly, the reason she had stepped into this world in the first place, and she met Victoria's gaze directly, her voice steady. "Right now, I am building something new," she said, not defensive, not apologetic, just honest in a way that did not need explanation, and the silence that followed was brief but noticeable, the kind that shifted attention without anyone naming it, and Ethan's hand pressed slightly firmer against her back, not controlling, not directing, but present, as if acknowledging something unspoken. And Victoria studied her for a moment longer before giving a small nod, her smile returning, but softer now, less certain. "Well," she said lightly, "I hope it is worth the attention," and with that, she stepped away, leaving behind a space that felt subtly different, and as the conversation around them resumed, Lily exhaled slowly, unaware she had been holding her breath, and Ethan leaned closer just enough for his voice to reach only her, low, controlled, but carrying something new beneath it. "You handled that well," he said, and Lily glanced at him, surprised, because it was the first time he had acknowledged her not as part of the arrangement, but as someone who had done something right, and for a moment, the noise of the room faded, replaced by something quieter, something more uncertain, as if the line between performance and reality had just shifted again, without either of them realizing how far it would go. The rest of the evening should have felt like a performance that ended once the lights dimmed and the last guest left, but something lingered, something quieter and harder to ignore, and Lily did not notice it fully until they were back in the car, the city light sliding past the window in soft blurs, the noise of the event replaced by a silence that felt different from before, less structured, less controlled, and she kept her hands folded in her lap, the ring catching the faint glow from outside, reminding her that this was still part of the agreement, still something temporary, even if it no longer felt as simple as it had just hours ago. And Ethan sat beside her, not looking at his phone, not reviewing messages, just staring ahead as if something had shifted in his mind as well, and after a moment, he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "Victoria tends to test people," he said, not as a warning, but as an explanation, and Lily let out a small breath, her shoulders relaxing. "Just slightly, I figured," she replied, glancing down at her hands. "People like her usually do," and Ethan turned his head then, studying her in a way that was no longer purely analytical. "People like her," he repeated, and Lily hesitated, not because she did not have an answer, but because she was not sure if she should say it. "People who already know they belong somewhere," she said finally, her voice even. "They do not like surprises," and the word settled between them, simple but honest, and Ethan did not respond right away, as if he were considering something beyond what she had said, something deeper, something that did not fit as easily into the categories he was used to. And when the car stopped and they stepped back into the quiet of the penthouse, the contrast was immediate, the world outside loud and demanding, the world inside still and contained, and Lily moved instinctively toward the window, slipping off her heels with a small sigh of relief, the tension of the night finally catching up to her, and she did not notice Ethan watching her until he spoke again. "You do not have to prove anything here," he said, and she turned, surprised, because the statement did not align with the rules he had set from the beginning. "I thought that was the entire point," she replied, a faint hint of a smile touching her lips, and for the first time, Ethan's expression shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, but real. "Not to me," he said, the words quiet, but certain, and the room seemed to hold that moment longer than it should have, the distance between them no longer defined only by the contract, but by something less clear, something neither of them had agreed to, and Lily looked away first, walking toward the kitchen as if she needed to move, to ground herself in something ordinary. "Do you want tea?" she asked, the question simple, almost out of place in a space like this, and Ethan hesitated, just briefly, before answering yes, as if the idea of something so normal did not quite belong in his routine. And as she moved around the kitchen, filling the kettle, measuring without thinking, the quiet sounds filling the space, Ethan remained where he was, watching, not intruding, not directing, just observing in a way that felt different from before. And when she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed for a fraction of a second, the contact light but noticeable, and neither of them pulled away immediately, not because they intended to stay, but because the moment held them there just long enough to register. And Lily stepped back first, her heartbeat slightly uneven, while Ethan took a sip, his gaze lowering to the cup as if it offered an easier focus than the shift he could no longer ignore. And somewhere between the silence, the city lights, and the warmth of something as simple as tea, the rules they had agreed on began to feel less like boundaries and more like something waiting to be broken, not all at once, but piece by piece, in ways neither of them had planned. The next few days unfolded with a rhythm that felt almost predictable on the surface, yet underneath, something subtle kept shifting, something neither Lily nor Ethan addressed out loud, and it showed itself in the smallest ways, in moments that were easy to dismiss but impossible to forget, like the morning Lily woke earlier than expected and found the penthouse already filled with soft sunlight, the city stretching endlessly beyond the glass. And for a second she forgot where she was, until she noticed a neatly folded blazer resting on the chair beside her door, one she had not left there. And when she stepped into the living area, Ethan was already at the dining table, reviewing documents with the same focused intensity she had come to expect. But when he looked up and saw her wearing the lighter dress she had chosen instead of the formal pieces prepared for her, his expression paused just slightly. "You have a meeting with me today," he said, his tone measured, but there was no criticism in it, and Lily nodded, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I know, I just thought I would wear something that feels like me," she replied. And for a moment, Ethan did not respond, his gaze lingering a second longer than necessary before he returned to his papers. "Then we will adjust," he said simply, but the words carried something new, a willingness to bend rather than correct. And later that afternoon, As they entered a sleek conference room filled with executives who spoke in numbers and expectations, Lily stayed slightly behind at first, observing, listening, until a conversation shifted unexpectedly toward a project involving community redevelopment, something the company viewed purely as an investment, and without thinking too much, she spoke, her voice steady but softer than the others. Have you considered how the changes might affect the people already living there? The room stilled for a brief second, the kind of silence that followed something unplanned, and Ethan turned his head toward her, not sharply, not with disapproval, but with a quiet attention that felt different from before, and one of the executives gave a polite smile, dismissive but controlled. "We are focused on growth," he replied, and Lily nodded slightly, not retreating. "Growth works better when people feel included," she said, her tone calm, grounded in something real, and this time, Ethan did not look away, did not redirect the conversation. Instead he leaned back slightly, considering. "Expand on that," he said, and the shift was immediate, subtle but undeniable, because for the first time, he was not just allowing her presence, he was inviting it, and as the discussion continued, Lily found herself speaking more, not trying to impress, not trying to prove anything, just offering perspective that came from a world far removed from polished boardrooms. And when the meeting ended, the executives filed out with polite nods, but the air felt different, less rigid, less certain, and Ethan remained where he was for a moment, watching the door close before turning to her. "You changed the direction of that conversation," he said, not accusing, not praising, just stating a fact, and Lily shifted slightly, unsure how to respond. "I did not mean to," she admitted, and Ethan's expression softened just enough to be noticeable. "That is why it worked," he replied, and the words settled between them in a way that felt heavier than the moment itself, because it was not about the meeting, not really, it was about something deeper, something neither of them had planned for, and as they walked out together, side by side, the distance between them felt smaller, not because the rules had disappeared, but because they were quietly being rewritten, not in ink, not in clear terms, but in choices, in moments, in the way Ethan now slowed his pace just slightly so she did not have to catch up, and in the way Lily no longer felt like she was simply playing a role, but becoming something real in a space that was never meant for her, and neither of them said it out loud, but both of them felt it, the shift, the change, the beginning of something that no contract could fully contain. The shift did not announce itself with anything dramatic, it did not come with a clear moment or a decision either of them made out loud, it simply existed, growing quietly in the space between routine and something more, until the day it all began to unravel started like any other, with sunlight stretching across the penthouse floor and the distant hum of the city rising below. And Lily stood by the kitchen counter flipping through a small notebook she had started keeping again, a habit from before everything had changed, before contracts and expectations, her handwriting filling the pages with thoughts she did not say out loud, and she did not hear Ethan approach until his voice broke through gently. "You write every morning," he observed, not as a question, but as something he had noticed more than once, and Lily glanced up, slightly surprised. "It helps me think," she said, closing the notebook halfway, unsure if this part of her belonged here, and Ethan nodded, his gaze lingering for a second before shifting. "We have a press briefing this afternoon," he said, his tone returning to something more structured, more familiar. "It will be different," and there was a pause in the way he said it that made Lily look at him more closely. "Different how?" she asked, and Ethan hesitated, something rare and almost invisible. "There has been attention," he admitted, choosing his words carefully. "People are asking questions," and Lily felt it then, the subtle tightening in her chest, the reminder that this world did not allow things to remain simple for long. "About us?" she asked quietly, and Ethan nodded once. "About you," and the words carried more weight than he intended, because they were not just about curiosity, they were about scrutiny, about a world that did not accept unknown variables without trying to define them, and the briefing room was already filled by the time they arrived, cameras set, voices murmuring, an energy that felt sharper than before, and as they stepped forward together, Lily could feel the shift immediately, the way eyes followed her more closely, the way questions seemed to wait just beneath the surface, and Ethan began as he always did, controlled, composed, addressing business matters with precision, until the first question came, direct, unavoidable. "Mr. Cole, can you clarify how long you have known Miss Carter?" And Lily felt the room narrow slightly, the focus tightening, and Ethan answered without hesitation, repeating the narrative they had agreed on. Steady and convincing, but then another question followed, sharper. This time, there are reports suggesting Miss Carter has no professional background connected to your industry. Can you explain how this relationship developed so quickly? And this time, the tone carried something else, something closer to doubt, and Lily felt it, the implication, the unspoken suggestion that she did not belong. And before Ethan could respond, another voice added, "Some sources are calling this arrangement strategic rather than personal." And the word arrangement landed harder than it should have, echoing louder in Lily's mind than the rest of the room, and for a moment, everything felt too clear, too exposed, the contract, the rules, the truth sitting just beneath the surface, and she turned slightly toward Ethan, waiting, expecting him to dismiss it, to correct it, to protect the version of reality they had created, but there was a fraction of a second, just a fraction, where he did not speak immediately, where hesitation slipped through, and that was all it took. Because in that space, doubt found its way in, sharp and undeniable, and Lily stepped back slightly, not visibly enough for the room to notice, but enough for herself to feel it, the distance returning, the boundary reappearing in a way that hurt more now than it had before, and when Ethan finally answered, his voice steady again, the damage had already begun, because this time, the silence had said more than the words ever could, and Lily realized something she had not allowed herself to fully see until now, that no matter how real it had started to feel, there was still a contract underneath it all, and in the world they were standing in, that truth had a way of finding its way to the surface, whether they were ready for it or not. The silence in the car on the way back felt heavier than anything that had been said in the briefing room, as if every word left unspoken had followed them out and settled between them, and Lily kept her eyes on the passing lights outside, her reflection faint in the glass, barely recognizable now, not because of how she looked, but because of how she felt, and Ethan sat beside her, still, composed on the surface, but quieter than she had ever seen him, as if something inside him had shifted, and he had not yet decided what to do with it. And when they finally stepped into the penthouse, the door closing behind them with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have, Lily did not wait. She did not move toward the window or the kitchen or any of the spaces she had slowly started to claim. Instead, she turned to face him, the distance between them no longer something she could ignore. "You hesitated," she said, her voice steady but not cold, just clear, and Ethan met her gaze. Not deflecting, not denying, it was a press question, he replied, controlled, measured, but the answer did not land the way it might have before, because now it sounded like something rehearsed, something safe, and Lily shook her head slightly. "No," she said, softer but more certain, "it was not the question, it was your answer, or the lack of it," and the words settled between them, sharper than either of them expected, and Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand briefly through his hair. A rare break in his usual composure. "You think I was unsure," he said, and Lily held his gaze, not stepping back this time. "I think for a second, you remembered what this really is," she answered, and there it was, the truth neither of them had said out loud in days, the contract, the agreement, the boundary that had slowly blurred until it suddenly felt too clear again, and Ethan's expression shifted, not defensive, but conflicted in a way that did not fit the man who always seemed to have control. "It started that way," he said, his voice lower now, less certain than before, and Lily let out a quiet breath, her fingers brushing lightly against the ring as if grounding herself in something tangible. "Exactly," she replied, "it started that way," and the silence that followed was not empty, it was full of everything they had not defined, every moment that had crossed the line without permission, every small change that had made this feel like something more than it was supposed to be, and Lily stepped back slightly, not out of fear, but out of clarity. "I cannot stand there and pretend this is real when the world is already questioning it anew. You are not even sure what it is anymore," she said, her voice steady even as something inside her tightened, and Ethan took a step forward, instinctive, as if closing the distance could fix what had just been said. "Lily," he began, but she shook her head gently, stopping him. "No," she said, softer now, "you made the rules, remember," and the words were not an accusation, they were a reminder, one that landed harder than anything else. And for the first time, Ethan did not have an immediate response, did not have a solution ready, because this was not a negotiation, this was something he could not control with logic or structure, and Lily looked at him for a moment longer, searching, not for an answer, but for something she could believe in, and when she did not find it, she reached for the ring, sliding it slowly off her finger, the motion small but final, and she placed it gently on the table between them. The soft sound it made louder than it should have been. "This was part of the deal," she said quietly, "and I think we both forgot that," and then she turned, not rushing, not dramatic, just certain, walking toward her room to gather the few things that were truly hers, leaving behind everything else, including the version of something that had almost felt real, and Ethan remained where he was, staring at the ring resting on the table, the one rule he had broken without realizing it now lying in front of him, undeniable. And for the first time since this arrangement began, he understood something he had not planned for, that the moment she walked away, the contract stopped being the problem, and became the one thing he could no longer hide behind. The next morning felt unfamiliar in a way the penthouse never had before, not because anything had changed in the space itself, but because Lily was no longer there to fill it, and Ethan stood near the window with the city stretching endlessly below him, the same view, the same silence, but for the first time it felt empty, not controlled, not intentional, just empty, and his gaze dropped slowly to the table behind him where the ring still rested exactly where she had left it, untouched, the light catching its surface as if nothing about it had changed, even though everything had, and he walked toward it without thinking, picking it up between his fingers, the weight of it different now, no longer a symbol of an agreement, but a reminder of something he had failed to understand until it was already gone, and for a moment he stood there, the memory of her voice echoing quietly, not angry, not dramatic, just certain, and it was that certainty that stayed with him, because she had not left out of impulse, she had left because she saw something clearly that he had not been willing to admit, and across the city, Lily moved through a world that felt both familiar and distant at the same time, her small apartment quiet, the air still, her notebook open on the table where she had left it before everything changed, and she sat down slowly, staring at the blank page for a long moment before finally writing again, her hand steadier than she expected. Because even though something inside her ached, there was also clarity, the kind that comes when you stop pretending something is what you want it to be and accept what it actually is, and days passed, not dramatically, not with sudden change, just quietly, each of them returning to routines that no longer felt quite the same, until the day Ethan stepped into a room filled with executives once again, the same polished table, the same expectations, but this time, something was different, because when the conversation turned toward the deal that had started all of this, the one that required stability, image, control, he did not respond the way he always had, he did not calculate, did not adjust his answer to fit the outcome they expected. Instead he looked at the documents in front of him, then at the people around him, and finally he spoke, his voice steady but no longer detached. "We are not moving forward with this," he said, and the reaction was immediate, confusion, questions, concern, but he did not shift, did not explain it away with strategy, because for the first time, the decision was not about business, it was about something else entirely, and later that afternoon, he found himself standing outside a building that looked nothing like the world he had always existed in, smaller, quieter, real in a way that no glass tower could replicate, and for a second, he did not move, as if crossing that distance required something more than just a step, until finally, he did, walking forward, each movement deliberate, until he reached the door and knocked, and when it opened, Lily stood there, her expression shifting from surprise to something softer, something cautious but not closed, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence carrying everything that had not been said, until Ethan finally did something he had not done before, not in business, not in life. He let go of control, holding out the ring not as an expectation, not as part of a deal, but as a choice. "There is no contract this time," he said, his voice quieter than she had ever heard it, but more certain than ever. "No rules, no conditions, just me." And Lily looked at him, really looked at him, searching for the distance that had once been there, the hesitation that had broken everything, and when she did not find it, something in her shifted, not instantly, not perfectly, but enough, and she stepped forward slowly, not reaching for the ring yet, but closing the space between them in a way that mattered more, because this time, it was not about what they had agreed to, it was about what they were choosing, and for the first time since any of this began, the future in front of them did not feel like something written in fine print, it felt open, uncertain, and real.